everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Christian Contrarian. I'm Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and this is episode 25, End Time Signs, Sorcery and Pharmaceuticals. And this is an extension of the last few sessions that we've done, and we were talking about birth pangs, and then we were talking about the two tribulations. And we're going to build on that in terms of the end time signs, but I do want to go back and cover off one point on how we use the word tribulation and how I described it, both in the documents I make available and on the shows on the two different tribulations. And so one of the things we need to keep in mind is that tribulation, affliction, persecution, trouble, and all the other meanings associated with its Greek root word, which is thalipes, needs to be translated and selected for the right meaning for the narrative that it's in. And one of the things that we saw in the various applications, and I gave several examples, was that they're almost used interchangeably, and I wish the translators would have been a little bit more consistent in that application, because most people rely on the English and they don't realize how many different meanings there are for thalipes and how many times they flip back and forth with their inconsistencies, as with tribulation and affliction in both Mark and Matthew, and they're talking about the same event. And then that adds to the confusion as to what is the Great Tribulation, which is mentioned in Revelations, and it's mentioned in Matthew, and it's mentioned in Revelation 7. And one of the listeners who I've done a fair bit of corresponding with was good enough to make clear what his concerns were with the terms of the Great Tribulation and how it was affecting his understanding of the chronology. And so the distinction that we need to make is that I don't agree with the King James Version use of the translation at time, and I wish they would use the first tribulation as a different word from the second tribulation in terms of whether it was going to be affliction, persecution, trouble, or whatever they wanted to use. They should have been a little bit more consistent, in my opinion. So in Revelation 7, you get the Great Tribulation of the saints, and that's the key. That's the first half of the last 7 years and the tribulation of the saints. When Matthew and Mark are talking about it, they're talking about the tribulation of the world as opposed to the saints, that will be greater than anything ever seen since the creation of the world. So this is a significantly different event, even though it's in the same sort of time frame of the last 7 years, but one is the tribulation of the saints, one's the tribulation of the rest of the world. So again, we have to deal with the translators in terms of how they translate the words, and I can see how some confusion that comes in. But when you look at all the different resurrections and everything else, it starts to make sense if you make that distinction and understand that thalipes can be translated as tribulation and several other meanings, and consistency would make that a little bit easier for you. So probably should have been a little bit clearer on that, but I wanted to get that on the table right away. So moving on with today's show, we're going to be adding on to those end time signs, particularly as they work with the pandemics and the famine and the earthquakes and the wars. And as we talked about, we're talking about sorcery and pharmaceuticals, and in particular, a few verses in Revelation, and I'm just going to name them out as 18:23, 9:21, 21:8, and 22:15. You've got sorcerer and sorceries sort of interchangeably there. They all come from the same root meaning and same series of words, and I'll come back to that later in the show. But in 18:23 of Revelation, it says, "By thy sorceries were all the nations deceived." And that's Babylon, who is deceiving all of the nations. It's Babylon who's destroyed by Antichrist, conspiring with the 10 kings at the midpoint in Revelation 17 to destroy Babylon. So when Babylon is destroyed, we're understand by the verse here that somehow Babylon used sorceries along with false prophets and false miracles and things like that to delude all of the nations. And it's a very interesting, bizarre word to use the word sorceries as we understand it today, but we're going to come back to how that was selected by the King James Version translators in a few minutes. And so what we do know is whatever these sorceries are, it's going to be very important in Babylon's rise to power, how Babylon maintains power for the first 3.5 years, and how that is going to help with Antichrist to usurp the world at the 3.5 year point and complete the beast system. And we're going to touch on some of those things as we go through. So typically sorceries, it's connected to imagery and words, and by definition to wizards and witches and magic and charms and enchantments and all of those occult words that are so prevalent in today's society and entertainment as we get inundated with that kind of brainwashing. And so we want to have a closer look at this so that we can bring it into reality of how it works into the end time signs and how it's working today. And I also want to note that the Greek word that's used for sorcery in Revelations, in the verses in Revelation that I talked about, it's also the same word that's used in Galatians 5:20, where you get the word witchcraft that is used. And that has a significant implication because we talked about the wizards and the witches of the sorceries are interconnected in its ancient meaning, and we need to also understand that warlocks and witches are the priests and the priestesses of polytheism in many of the different sects that are around the world. And so we're going to have a closer look and tie all of this together for you. So when we look at sorcery as it's used outside of the book of Revelation, as it's translated into English as sorcery, we're going to look at Acts 13 and Acts 8, and there we're going to see sorcery, sorcerer, and Simon the sorcerer woven into the narrative there. And I'm going to look at the word that is used for this false prophet, for this almost false prophet type figure, or some people would even say Antichrist type figure. I would say more false prophet by the description of sorcerer and the ancient meaning. But the word that is used for sorcerer and sorceries are a series of words. There's 3 of them. They mean basically the same thing. So it's magos, magia, and maguo. That's 3097, 3096, and 3095 out of Greek. And it's a different word that's used for sorceries in Revelation, which is really interesting. And again, it comes back to that consistency factor that the translators were working with, that I wish they would have been a little bit more consistent with the root word and the meanings translating into English. So let's dig into this aspect because it is related. It's a different word, but it is definitely related. So in Matthew 2, we get wise men who arrive at the time of Jesus' birth, and we would understand them as the Magi. So you see a relationship there very, very quickly. And this is the same word, 3097 magos, that was used in Acts 13 and Acts 8, and the same series of words with the same meanings. And when you look that up in the Greek dictionary for the New Testament, it's rooted in a Hebrew word that's called rab meg, and it's kind of hyphenated, 7248, and that's in Jeremiah 39:3 for that exact word, rab meg, and that's a foreign word that comes into the Hebrew language just as the Magi, the wise men, were coming out of the east or Mesopotamia, and that's important to understand here. And rab meg means soothsayer, magician, and princes of Babylonia. And that's why it's interesting, because when we understand that, then we understand that this word for Magi through Babylonia is an extension of the Nimrod empires after Babel, is all connected, and the religion of Babel is connected to this word magi and sorceries and magic and everything that's connected for the signs in the end times, particularly as we're going to bring that back to Revelation in a few minutes. And Babel is the root word for the Babylon religion. So this all starts to make sense that if we're going to have a resurgence of the ancient religion, that is the Babylon religion as we understand it, it should have the same characteristics as it would have had throughout history, not only at Babel, but how it rode the seven empires. It's the polytheist mystical religion that rode the seven empires of ages past and will again in the end time until it's destroyed by Antichrist at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So now when we look at other Old Testament applications for similar use, you have Exodus 7:11 and you have Genesis, I just lost the book there, and Genesis 41:8, where you have priests, wise men, sorcerers, and magicians that are used. And again, that all goes back to the same root meaning that we've been talking about, and all are the same as you take that back. Perfect consistency in terms of how it's being used. And these were the wise men and the Magi, and they were also known as Magi in Egypt, that were centered at the main occult center of the ancient world, which was Heliopolis, the Sun Temple. And it's the occult center for wise men and was also a mystery school where Moses was educated at and all the elite and the nobility were educated at. And they were also a society of secret societies there, where the secret societies link their history back through. And they were also a medical school, which is very, very important as we start to bring this into the end time. So we have a lot of words with the use of magic and sorcerers that show up into the King James Version Bible, and some of the modern contemporary translations will use similar types of words. So they might use magic spells or something like that instead of sorceries. But they're talking about the same kind of meaning and going with the same kind of words that the King James Version translators used. So if we roll this forward to the time of the King James Version Bible and the translators that were working on it, you have a society that's created about 50 years after the writing of the King James Version Bible, and that's the Royal Society, or the Invisible College. And the invisible term is a term the Rosicrucians like to use as the invisible ones, and that's why the Royal Society is also known as the Invisible College. And it was founded basically in 1660. Some people take that back a touch a few years to the 1640s. It's interrupted by Cromwell. They reorganized in 1660 and get a King's Charter in 1662 by King Charles Stuart. And it's founded by Freemasons and Rosicrucians. And they call themselves the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists. What's really interesting about all of that is that as you look at the ancient meaning, one of the translation meanings that I didn't provide for Magi as it comes out of the New Testament for the wise men, they were also could be defined, or they could have used there if they wanted to, but it would denote a little bit different meaning. They could have used the word Oriental scientists. And now you have the first establishment of modern science and education that's going to dominate all science and education going forward, even to this day. An establishment that called themselves sorcerers as a transition out of sorcery and into modern scientists, which is a different, just the same coin of the same type of words and meanings that they were using. And we need to understand now that Francis Bacon was a Rosicrucian. and a very famous Rosicrucian, and wrote a number of alchemy books and occult books and writings, like the New Atlantis, where you have a 10 king Nephilim nation or empires that are going to run the end time with a science-based and partnered with Theosophy or New Age or Gnosticism. They have several names for the same religion. Will partner with education and science in the end time with these 10 Nephilim type of kings ruling over. So, and he's also the inspirational founder for the Royal Society. And his painting hangs in the entrance to the Royal Society even to this day. That's how important he is, not only in the occult, but in the science community who are controlled by these sorcerers and secret society members and bloodline members as you get down through the sort of that kind of hierarchy. And so the word sorcerer was part of the parlance, part of the speech being formed by Francis Bacon, along with his Spear Shaker Society and Society of the Helmet Society, which was a entertainment writer society used to create a new English out of Old and Middle English that would be this universal language for the world, sort of in that Babel kind of understanding where everybody's going to have one common language to create that whole allegory for the end time. Again, they're trying to bring about the end time. They're not trying to avoid it. So we need to understand that. And so this word was not bizarre to them. And in fact, it meant to them that they were these Oriental scientists. They were developing the 7 sacred sciences, and they were developing the medicine. And out of this Royal Society comes the Royal College of Physicians or doctors in England, and called that by similar terms in Commonwealth nations around the world. So all of this is connected, and the use of magic, magi, wise men, sorcerer, magic spells, and witchcraft, as we've talked about in Galatians 5:20, all makes sense if you understand that Bacon, according to Manly P. Hall, one of the sort of great patriarchal historians for Freemasonry, as he documented in many, many lectures, he recorded, and there are other sources that suggest this as well, that he was the last editor of the King James Version Bible. So he and those people that would have been working under him would have been using this new language and encoding it with markers and symbols, just as Manly P. Hall says that you can't imagine how many markers that they've got in there. I don't think it changes the meaning of the Bible much at all, but understand they mean a lot to the secret societies, the words that are used. And there's some that are a bit obnoxious in there that they shouldn't have used, and I'm not too happy about them using "my Lord," but that's a rabbit hole I'm not going to go down. But if you want to get a hold of me, I'll tell you a little bit more about that and provide you a little bit more information. And what's interesting is we understand that this was their language, and we understand that witchcraft is one of the words used for the word sorcery that's used in Revelation is Masonry, and that's the ancient organization as opposed to the contemporary modern Freemasonry organization that is formed after the fall of the Knights Templar, who is their parent organization and sponsored with its founding by the Sinclairs. To house the escaping Templar adepts that escaped to Scotland at that time. So having said that, Masonry is known as the craft. And that's why you can make these connections. Anything that sort of got craft has something to do with the 7 sacred sciences and secret societies, and witchcraft in particular, as it would be one of the crafts of the 7 sacred sciences, just as warlocks and witches are priests and priestesses of polytheism. So you start to see some of this really starting to come together in terms of the language that speaks to the language of the secret societies and the people of the time, and they take a different meaning than what we do in their allegorical approach to the Bible and look for them to pull these words out in a different understanding to a certain degree as they allegorize all of the Bible as a fairy tale with hidden meanings understood that you have to be adept of the secret societies and mystical religions to decode. They're going to use this to change the meaning of the Bible and part of the deceptions that are coming, and look for all of this to really start to take shape with the rise of Babylon and part of the sorceries that we're going to move into now. So the word that is used for sorcery in Revelation is the word G5331, which is pharmakeia. And that's the word that's used in Revelation 18:23 that I opened up the show with, 9:21, and the same word that's used for witchcraft in Galatians 5:20. And then for the word sorcerers, as opposed to sorceries, you've got two other words that are used in Revelation 21:8. That's pharmakos, and 22:15 Revelation is pharmakos, sorcerers. But it's part of the same root words and the same meanings, just this sort of different application in terms of the Greek translation of that, and then how we translate that, from sorcerer to sorcery. So same sort of idea there. And as soon as we start to say the word pharmacy or anything associated with that, that starts to bring up mixture of medicines and pharmacists and big pharma who controls all of these prescription drugs. But this could also be added to other drugs that are sold by drug dealers, controlled by gangs, which are another type of secret society, as I've covered off in the past, who swear oaths and have an order and have godfathers and all that sort of imagery. It is funded and controlled. They're hitting the prescribed or the non-prescribed drug end of the market with the same agenda to addict people to drugs as Big Pharma is. And it's one of the things we need to be concerned with going into the end times in terms of dumbing us down with pharmaceuticals. Even though we need, in a lot of cases, that to maintain our health and life, we need to make sure we know where that line in the sand is that we're not going to go beyond, as that starts to partner closer with medical associations, which is all part of what's going on in this sorcery of pharmakeia of the end time. So when we look at how the pharmakeia or pharmakos comes from Greek and then into the Baconian language that goes into the King James Version Bible, it starts to make some sense that it goes from Latin, or it goes from Greek to the word Latin, which is the word pharmakos, and there's another couple of words that are similar in there as well that have the same type of meanings, and then into Old French, which is pharmacy with an F. And there's a lot of Old French that is put into the new Baconian English that's also going to go into the King James Version Bible, just as replenish, which is a often debated word of Genesis 1:28, is also has a similar type of etymology. You need to understand that the application of replenish is actually correct in terms of how it comes out of Old French and out of Latin and Greek. And again, if you want some information on that, get a hold of me. I'll send that to you. But so pharmacy enters into the Baconian English as a meaning that goes back into history of these alchemists who are mixing these potions and these spells and these enchantments that are all part of the whole meaning, particularly as they understand it. So the meaning of pharmacy as it's coming down in this etymology, as opposed to the Greek that we pull out for the New Testament, although it will have enchantments and spells as part of that meaning for pharmaceutical. But the understanding as it comes down through the historical etymology means drug preparation, therapeutic or harmful, or even poisonous. So preparation, therapeutic, healing, or poisonous or harmful. And it's prepared by sorcerers, doctors, wise men, magi, from the mystery schools, from the occult. So again, drugs aren't necessarily bad. How it can be used is what we really need to be concerned about, and how they're starting to use it, and the amount of prescriptions that's going on, and how that's working with big pharma, with the oligopolies around the world, which is National Socialism as it comes out of the left wing, and how it was established in Nazi Germany, where you have these now global oligopolies controlling industries and working, and we see more of that, particularly in North America now, where you have, whether it's high-tech companies or pharmaceuticals, they are all working for the left-wing agenda so that they get an oligopoly on the world. They get rich, the left gets the power. So we need to understand how that's coming together. So you shouldn't be surprised then that they have iconology that reflects this history. So we'll begin with the Pharmaceutical Association, and there is another symbol that's also used in the United States. The most common and the most historical one is something that they call the Bowl of Hygeia. And what that is it's this goblet or chalice, or more or less a grail, because that would fit their language better in terms of the allegory of the grail and the bloodlines. You have this snake that sort of weaves around with its head coming in over the top of the goblet, and that's known as Asclepius's snake. And I'm going to come back to that, but snake is a very, very interesting word, and when you look at that from a serpent and a seraphim and the ancient gods perspective, you start to get an understanding, because the seraphim angels were watchers. They were part of the three sets of watchers, of the Ophanim, of the cherubim, and the watchers around the throne. These are the ones who are the sons of God in Genesis 6. And these are the ones who are governing the world, just as watchers, even loyal watchers, even at the time of Daniel in Daniel 4, where watchers is used 3 times, it goes back to the meaning of watcher, those who are awake and those who don't sleep around the throne. They're the ones who present God's governance in terms of who's going to be permitted to govern on the earth even at that time. And so you have the seraphim, fiery serpent angels, who are snake faces and 6 wings, who are these dragons that are the dragon gods, or the plumed serpent gods, or the Naga gods, or the dragon creator gods, who provided all of this knowledge that, combined with the 7 sacred sciences of the antediluvian period developed by Enoch, son of Cain, that helped and partnered with the Nephilim and the mystical religions and the secret societies to bring about the apocalypse of water, and is going to work together again, just as in the days of Noah, as Jesus talks about, to bring about the end time. And Babylon, as we're told, is going to use this to seduce all of the nations and to deceive them, and the people, of course, that are in the nations. And so when we look at the glyph that's used for Ptah, the ancient Egyptian parent god, that's similar to Satan and or An and or Kronos, all of the parent gods around the polytheism. He was depicted as 2 coiled serpents in the same shape as DNA. And all of these gods, in terms of what I'm talking about, are serpent gods, seraphim angels, fallen rebellious watchers. And so he is the parent god of Egypt, where you have all of this ancient Egypt religion that comes as a second pillar out of Babel after the flood, and it also has an antediluvian history as well. And so they continue that knowledge after Babel, just as they do in Sumer or Shinar, with the Magi in Nimrod, and just as that spreads all around the Mediterranean. So that starts to make sense that Enki has serpentine imagery as well, and he's, a lot of people think Satan is Enki. I think it's more like Azazel, but they're both serpent kind of angels. So, pick one or the other, but Azazel is the one who is, charged with giving most of the knowledge that combined with Enoch and his religion and his mystery schools in the antediluvian epoch to humans. And so he's depicted by a coiled serpent around a staff or a rod or the tree of life. Understanding the tree of life or the world tree or pyramids connect the governors of heaven with the governors of the earth, and the heaven and earth are connected, so as done on heaven will be done on below, and again a significant meaning to them in the occult. And this is the same glyph or symbol that the mystery schools that develop medical knowledge and sciences also use. So we should not be surprised that medical associations around the world use a similar symbol. And the medical associations use a single, the professional ones use a single serpent around a rod, and commercial ones tend to use a dual serpent like the form of Ptah around a rod or a tree or a staff. And that all goes back to this Asclepius character that I mentioned, who is the father of medicine, either a demigod or a god as you take him back into Greek history. And he is the parent of somebody called Hygeia, who is his daughter, and that is the goblet of Hygeia. So she is the goddess of these drug mixtures and pharmaceutical products, and the daughter of the father of medicine. And the son of Asclepius is Hippocrates, who the Hippocratic Oath is sworn to. And you have this single serpent motif with this rod or this staff, and that's the rod of Asclepius. Just as he's shown in pictures, you just Google his name and it'll come up and you'll have that single serpent rod, and it's a symbol of the medical associations throughout history. And it's also the rod of Hermes, which is a god who is a messenger between heaven and earth and is providing knowledge and thought to be equated in a lot of occult traditions with Enoch. But again, not enough time to go down that rabbit hole today. But I'll leave you with the idea that the WHO organization uses the same serpent with the world in the background. And you have these wheat sheaves, which is a corona, or the laurel wreath, understanding that Apollo is a sun god, and somebody by the name of Laurel, a demigod or another god, was trying to escape, turned herself into a laurel tree to escape Apollo. Apollo takes some branches and forms it into this wreath that is this laurel wreath. And it's the same symbol that crowns the UN symbol organization and the WHO organization, and that's all an allegory of Apollo as a seraphim angel or Satan and a sun god with this crown of the world, because he's the prince and the god of this world. And the ancient watchers, whether it's Azazel or the other rebellious angels, are all seraphim in the government and the religious side, as we covered off in other shows. And that is showing a sign that they control the world. And what's important about that is we should expect the beast system that Babylon is going to get ready for Antichrist is going to come through the medical association, through bots and implants. And that's going to be the delivery system to the masses, because they're going to want it for health. And you're going to have the dumbing down with the pharmaceutical oligopolies and doctors prescribing these prescriptions as we get closer to the end time. So when we look at the words that are used in the New Testament and we take that back to Greek, we understand the relationship between pandemics and famines and war, where all of this gets a fast track for implementation. So look for it to be an increasing part of the birth pangs as we get closer to the last 7 years. So if you want to document on this or some of the other information that I talked about, get a hold of me through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. Thank you, and goodbye till the next time.